then the people are like, Ezekiel just did this weird thing by not mourning his dead wife. We have some questions. What does this mean? Because you've been doing a lot of weird, funky stuff since, and then you've been telling us, like, hey, everything that I'm doing here is something that's going to happen to us. So you're going to need to just lay this out for us. And then he's like, yeah, you're exactly right. I am the sign act. What has just happened here? My beloved was taken away from me. So will your beloveds, who are all back in Jerusalem. That's going to die. The temple's going to die. All of the people back home, they're all going to die. Don't worry about it. Well, he doesn't say that. But you're not going to mourn either. And you are also going to do these same things as I have done when that happens.
Hello and welcome to It Means What It Means, the podcast in which a guy with some college and a day job has long-form conversations about biblical texts. If you're listening for free, Happy New Year. Welcome back. Or welcome if you've never been here before. I appreciate you listening and stopping by. This is... I felt a freer hand in 2025 to have people come back on. It was a thing that I actively was trying to minimize to the greatest extent possible throughout 2024. But as I've started to cultivate relationships with people, there are people I'm really excited to have back on. And so when I came across the article that we're discussing today, and I saw the name Alexiana Fry, I was really eager to reach out to her and see if she wanted to come back on. And in scheduling that interview, actually ended up, possibly booking a second one because she has a book coming out in March. So if you're listening for free, you're hearing this in March, and she will be back shortly. I really appreciate the work that she's doing for a lot of reasons. It exposed me to ideas of what trauma is and how it could be applied to biblical texts as a hermeneutic, as a guide, as a way to understand the text, the time, the culture. But it also, and this article that we're discussing today, it helped me understand some things personally, and I'm very grateful for that. So I will try to minimize the talk on the front end of things, except to say, also, if you're listening for free, like, subscribe, do all of those things wherever you're listening. Apple, write reviews. Those things help. If you want to know what's going on with the podcast, when I record interviews, I push out promotional clips on Patreon, on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and then I'll share those on Blue Sky, Spoutable, Threads, Twitter. So if you want to stay on top of what's happening, and maybe there's a guest or a topic that you're interested in hearing about, following me on any one of those platforms is a good way to do that. If you follow me on YouTube, you get the full episode when it drops and those preview clips when they come out. If you want to make any guest suggestions, reach out to me. And there are episodes that are recorded. There's an episode that's recorded right now that you won't hear for a few weeks, but it is the result of someone who listens to the podcast telling a friend, hey, you should reach out to this dude. And whether it's you saying, hey, you should talk to this person I know, or this person whose work I enjoy, or it's your work, reach out. I'm open. I check my spam folder, so things don't just sit there until they expire. So you don't even have to worry about that. The ultimate, and I mentioned Patreon earlier, the ultimate support would be chip in $5 a month. You get episodes early. And I'm actually trying to come up with other ways of incentivizing people spending $5 a month to just kind of explain the reason that I want people going over there. If I can develop enough of a following that this could be something that pays for me to go to conferences, or eventually, fingers crossed, helps me pay the bills around here and could potentially become my day job. uh, you know, I would like to incentivize that as much as possible, because I don't want the free releases to ever need to have ads. I want to be able to put these conversations out there. I want people to benefit from them. I want people to engage with me, to let me know what else they want to learn about and any things that I could do to improve. And so the more people who chip in $5 a month over on Patreon, the closer I will be able to come to that kind of thing and still be able to grow a free audience. So, yeah, I understand that is me asking for generosity, but just know I am working on ways to uh, make it a better deal if you do chip in that money. Yeah, I think that's it. I will be back on the back end of the episode to set up next week's. Enjoy my conversation with Alexiana Fry. Alexiana Fry, welcome back.
Thank you for welcoming me back. I
Uh,
appreciate it.
what have you been up to since you were last on the podcast? I know I got to meet you in person at SBL in 2023, but what
Oh
have
my
you been up
word.
to?
Oh gosh. Oh gosh. Well, it's been a blur. It's been a blur. But I think the last time I was on, we were chatting about my first book, which came out in 2023, just so happens. And what's interesting is since then, I've been working, obviously, at the University of Copenhagen still. But I will be coming out with my next book in March 2026. So I've been really working. I wrote a whole other book in the time span between our podcasts. So I guess I'll be back on sometime in the spring.
Yes, you will.
Yeah.
Yes, you will.
Yeah. But I also like I did a few other things other than just write a book. So that's good.
The thing that has been popping up in my head as I've been thinking about, like, oh, she's coming back on, was the Barbie thing. And I know
Oh.
that's been a little while now.
Oh, that I do know because I just signed the contract and we just sent over last things. Should be coming out here soon. So there is a book on the Barbie in the Bible.
Oh,
The Barbie in the
I
Bible.
just remember there was like a lecture thing or something. Like it was
Yes, there was a conference.
okay, so that's what that's from.
Yes, and the conference proceedings will come out on that soon-ish. And it should be very fun because Barbie is fun.
It, yeah, I enjoyed the movie.
Yeah.
Um, I had sisters, so Barbies were always around, but I was always trying to
Did you only have sisters?
only.
Okay, I only had brothers, so it was Legos for me, like purely Legos. But we did this really hybrid thing where we would create Lego houses, but then the Beanie Babies would inhabit the Lego houses. So we played house with the Lego houses. Sometimes cars would also be people,
Yeah,
but no Barbies for me. I didn't like Barbies growing up. Weirdly
really.
enough,
Like
yeah.
had one or two and just didn't like them.
My mom wanted me to like Barbies, and I did not like them.
Well,
And weirdly enough, I didn't even do like a whole weird Barbie thing to him. I just was completely disinterested.
that's that's the best way to do it, right?
Yep. And now here I am going, do I need a Barbie?
You do you?
I don't I don't
You get
know.
to be whoever you want to be.
It's true. It's true. That is the Barbie theme at the moment. We'll see if they adjust based on current climate.
Yeah, how many network notes are they going to get that Barbie
Yeah, no
needs to be
joke.
more masculine
Uh-huh.
or
Uh-huh.
deferential to men? Hey,
Yeah.
well, it's much later in the day for you than it is for me, so
This is fair.
I don't want to waste too much of your time.
I
Um,
appreciate it.
so your article, which one I saw your name, so there was going to be an invitation, regardless. But
Thank you.
as I'm looking through, it was a couple of weeks ago now. The new Journal of Biblical Literature dropped, and I
Yeah.
see Don't Feel It, Don't Heal It, Ezekiel 24:15 through 27, and Divine Dissociation. So
Yes.
this is not the first question that I sent you. But I gotta ask, because as I was
Yeah.
reading this, I was like, it's hard to not take this article personally. So how dare you?
How dare I?
How dare you?
Hmm.
I knew the word dissociation, but I did not know how good I was at dissociating until I was reading
Oh
through this
gosh.
article.
Yeah.
Um, so how did you look? I know you did work on trauma.
Yeah.
You were the first in what has been, I think, 4 or 5 conversations now on this podcast around trauma and biblical studies. So you're
Yeah, you've
my
been chatting with Brad and Sarah.
Rebecca
Those are
Poe Hayes from
buddies.
Baylor. Yeah,
Love. Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Good
Uh,
quality trauma folks.
but you're my OG
Oh, wow.
trauma head. You are the it
Wow.
means what it means trauma mascot.
Yes. Thank you. I'm honored, truly, to be the face of trauma.
Yeah,
It,
good. How I would nominate some others, honestly. But
yeah,
how,
yeah.
so how did you land on this? Because it doesn't seem like dissociation is an interpretive key used for this passage.
Yeah, yeah. Most of the time, I mean, people have looked at not mourning, right? And not grieving in this passage and what it does or what the heck is happening, right? And people have lots of thoughts as I kind of share in there. And of course, reading Ezekiel as a traumatized guy is pretty common. Like having to write that section, even the editor, I had a much larger section sort of talking about the history of reading Ezekiel as the traumatized prophet. And the editor who's in New Testament studies was like, yeah, you don't even need to argue this anymore. That's like pretty just commonplace. Like that's just standard. I was like, all right, cool. Well, it helps with the word count, I guess, because I went over that. But what's interesting is I was fascinated by these sort of, as I always am, I'm always interested at the sort of lack of interconnection between trauma informed discussion and sort of the misogynistic portions of the Bible. There seems to be that they seem pretty disconnected. And actually, there's another chapter I will have out in the next bits of time here, discussing sort of what happens when we view Ezekiel as a traumatized prophet. And in a lot of cases, there's been several cases where biblical scholars who rightly understand Ezekiel as traumatized put him kind of in this eternal victim category. And they get very, very upset with feminist biblical scholars who don't recognize that he's a victim, right? So they don't recognize that somebody who is hurt can also hurt others. And somehow now it's justified. So I just recognized for starters, now there's so much work on Ezekiel 16 and 23, even Ezekiel 13 when it comes to sort of the misogyny in the text of Ezekiel, but not a lot on Ezekiel 24, where his wife is literally killed. And there's no response. What do we do with that, right? And so I wanted to see if there was something I could do to address what I felt like was a gap, but also come at it from more of a holistic trauma perspective that acknowledged kind of the both and of everything. What is fascinating about that is as I was reading it, I just started thinking about the TV series Severance. Now, so I do a whole thing on the TV series Severance to start off the article to sort of draw a comparison, which that happened before season 2 came out, but season 2 came out and then this article was published. And so the comparisons kind of only stay in season 1 a little bit, unless we're getting weird. But anyway, I just kind of stumbled upon it. I was trying to do an actual trauma reading of a text that hasn't really received a trauma informed reading, while also not excusing the behavior I saw. Doesn't honestly happen very often.
So curmudgeon that I am, I don't watch things that are popular for the
Oh
most
yeah,
part.
you are wrong on this one. I'm not gonna lie. You're wrong on this one.
Well,
You said you liked New Girl. You gotta Jared. This is something we are gonna fight about. Like
okay.
this Severance.
I'm not saying I won't ever watch it. Somebody actually at work described it to me as, um, for those of you who are Parks and Rec fans, if
Oh,
Ben Wyatt never got a job again and he just kept
yes.
being depressed Ben Wyatt. Um,
Is
I,
this something a depressed person would do?
I I compared it to Avatar, and if you don't get these references, that's not my problem.
No.
But I just started Peaky Blinders,
Okay.
and I'm not very far into it, but it's a guy who was in World War I, and he is a bookie and a gangster, and he is also suffering very deeply from having been he some job that worked in tunnels, and he had to go in and kill Germans in tunnels in the war, and
Hmm.
so it resonated with me honestly personally, like I kind of said in a
Mm-hmm.
jokey way,
Yep.
but as far as pop culture goes, thinking about a character like him, or even uh, several characters from like Boardwalk Empire or something. So,
Yeah, yeah.
for those of
Yeah.
you who don't like to engage with new stuff, but if you want to go into the Severance stuff, that's not a problem at all. If
Oh no, it's
no,
honestly good. I mean, just to come back to how you started this with how dare you. Um Genuinely, I don't think, because dissociation is, and it is, it's so common, right? And there is a spectrum of dissociating, right? Daydreaming is technically dissociative. So we all dabble. We're all this. I mean, if we're going to get really political, let's talk about this current moment in time and the fact that the people in government right now are brilliant in what they do, because it's a tactical overwhelm. They are trying to force us into a state where we just completely sever and let what happens, right? If we can make sure that people are inactive, great. They are so overwhelmed that they cannot respond, right? Um, so for many issues, putting people in a dissociative state is the point. And to be honest, a lot of the crises in this current moment, of course, some of us dissociate. It's a lot. It's so much.
I have found that it's actually helpful to think less about right now and more about 20 years ago,
Oh yeah,
because right now can seem so overwhelming. But I
yeah.
think pointing to 20, 21, 22 years ago, particularly, in the wake of 9/11, but rolling into a global war on terror after that,
Mm-hmm.
where we were so overwhelmed, we we were told, just hey, live your normal life, and we were trying to live our normal life, and then, oh, story about Abu Ghraib, oh, story about, CIA black site, story about Guantanamo Bay. So torture and death and destruction, when you cast back to look at that, I feel like okay, that's a little bit more cemented, even if you have to, you know, move away some dust, than looking at right now where everything does feel dynamic in a way that, yeah, you do just want to back
Just need a
off
break,
and
right?
not feel and not
Yep,
grieve.
yep.
Um,
But the
so,
reality is, right, if we would have taken a beat, if we would have taken a second and mourned and grieved, and instead that night, if I'm not mistaken, that night on 9/11, uh, Bush declared war essentially, right? It still had to go through Congress and everything, but he still declared what he did. Instead of bringing our country through a moment of grief and processing, uh, things were decontextualized and dehistoricized, and trauma was able to be weaponized for political purposes. That just created even more atrocity. We gotta stop. We gotta grieve. We've gotta heal.
so does it take authority? Because in that instance of 9/11
Mm,
and a president of the United States delivering a message
mm,
of like, hey, go on that trip, go to the shopping mall, which I don't know that that's what he said that night, but within a few months, that was the message of like,
yeah,
get
yeah.
out there
Move
and
on. Move
spend your
on.
money.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll send you a check.
So, so there's an authority figure.
Mm,
It's a little bit less prohibitive, I think, than what happens in Ezekiel 24. But do
yeah.
you want to? Do you want to? So Ezekiel's wife, whom you assigned her this name, or
I
is that
have. Yeah,
okay?
that's me. Yep. And we can come back to that. But I will say now we're getting into theories of like communal constructs of power. And I will say I do think that that is present in Ezekiel. I do think it is creating a collective trauma narrative. And I do see Ezekiel as sort of a community mediator that is shaping and creating the story narrative of communal trauma for that community. Um, for his own ideological purposes. Granted, he says that they're Adonai's, but alas. Um, but all of this to say, what I find fascinating is that the dissociation then in a kind of political level in the text is also fascinating, given what you were just sharing right now, right? Like we're not going to feel it, we're not going to heal it, and this is what comes out of that. This is what happens when we don't do that, and it's for a particular purpose and a reason. However, is that reason good, or is it, that's a question that you even ask, right? Is this resilience, is this healing, is this, what is this, right? So ooh, yeah.
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on, yeah.
What? Okay, so the text itself.
Hmm.
Where are we situated?
Yeah.
What are we seeing happening?
Yeah. Yeah. So we're kind of in the middle of the book, I would say. Kind of in the middle. We're about to kind of transition into some other stuffs. But the first half, well, I'm calling it the half. Other scholars would disagree with me, and I'm just kind of shooting off. Um, but we've just now covered some significant chunks where Israel, specifically Judah and its people, and definitely those who are still left in the land, um, are being discussed in some not so great ways. There is a lot that happens at the very beginning of Ezekiel. So I'm like now just like blabbering. When we get to chapter 24, we have also, as I mentioned earlier, we've gone through some pretty significant misogynistic chunks. And in fact, chapter 24 is on the heels of chapter 23, where we've got we've got the sisters, and they're whoring, and we need to punish them, and it's very incredibly violent and really rough. Then we get to chapter 24, and there's this prophecy, and it involves in the first 15 verses, yeah, first 14 verses, there's a prophecy that involves meat in a pot, and the pot is corroded, and so is the meat, and it's all got to get thrown away, right? And it is kind of a metaphor about about Judah, and the land is corroded, and everybody in it is corroded. It's all got to go, like it's all got to burn up. It's all got to get purified. And then Ezekiel gets a knock on his door. That doesn't actually happen, but that's what I'm saying. It's happening, proverbially, from Adonai. And he's like, hey, by the way, I'm going to kill your wife. People get very upset when I put it that way because God didn't do it. It just magically happened, right? Um, because a lot of folks would really like to absolve God in this text. I do not do that. Nevertheless, God gives him a little knock on his door. And he says, hey, I'm going to kill your wife. And when that happens, here's the things that you cannot do and the things that you can do. And then the text gets kind of confusing. The actual event happens. And then the people are like, Ezekiel just did this weird thing by not mourning his dead wife. We have some questions. What does this mean? Because you've been doing a lot of weird, funky stuff since, and then you've been telling us like, hey, everything that I'm doing here is something that's going to happen to us. So you're going to need to just lay this out for us. And then he's like, yeah, you're exactly right. I am the sign act. What has just happened here? My beloved was taken away from me. So will your beloveds, who are all back in Jerusalem. That's going to die. The temple's going to die. All of the people back home, they're all going to die. Don't worry about it. Well, he doesn't say that. But you're not going to mourn either. And you are also going to do these same things as I have done when that happens. And sure enough, in I forget what chapter it is. There comes a day when a runner from the events of the destruction of the temple shows up at the camp and lets them know what's happened. Um, so yeah, that's the brief overview of what occurs in 15 through 27 in a nutshell. I have always, as an aside, Jared, wanted to get biblical scholars deeply inebriated and then ask them to summarize biblical passages that they've long worked on just to see what happens.
Is that
But
not
I feel like I don't need alcohol to do that kind of summarize,
I'm
summarizing.
I assumed that was a game that would happen somewhere in November.
I really hope that it does in the future. We'll see what happens.
Well, to those of you who are actually, I don't know that this will be out by the time SBL. So SBL 2026, that needs to be a game that you guys pitch.
Drunk Bible scholar.
You know
Yeah.
what? You know who would probably like that is John Dunn from over at the Two Cities, because he's always talking about booze. Like that's the last like 6 episodes of their podcast has been about alcohol in the Bible. So I'm sure they would even make a
Oh.
show out of it.
I could talk to Brandon. We can see what happens.
There you go.
Brandon's good.
As far as yeah, I think. Well, no, he's like second best beard that's ever been on this podcast. But definitely, probably the most handsome Bible scholar I've ever met.
Oh, Brandon?
Yeah.
I'm going to tell him you said that because he will love that very
Well,
much.
it's going to be in this episode, so if he listens, he'll find out. I don't know that he does.
Brandon.
I don't know that he
Oh,
does.
he's
but
so wonderful. What a joy. What a joy.
Actually, I talked to him on an election. Well, today's not an election day, but for listeners, today is the start of early voting in Texas, and my son, who is 18, will be voting for the first time. And when I spoke to Brendan, it was election day 2024.
Boy.
Since we're talking about politics, on the subject though of absolving Adonai, of absolving God, it made me think. So I think the previous or 2 issues prior to the one that this essay or this article is published in, Ryan Chester had an article about Leviticus 10:1-3, and I was thinking about this while I was reading your article too. Aaron's silence,
Yeah.
at the death of his sons.
Yep.
And so I know that there are other passages in Hebrew Bible where something awful happens, and I know the proclivity that I grew up around was just like, well, that was providence or whatever.
Yeah. Yep. Explain it away.
Adonai is an active character in
Yes.
the Hebrew Bible,
Yes.
and that's something that needs to be kept in mind, right?
Yep. Yep.
And here, you know what? Honestly, whether Adonai is responsible for, and actually, how do you pronounce it? I don't want to say it wrong.
Libkata?
Libkata. Okay, I would have said it wrong.
I say it like that. I don't know if that's how you would pronounce it, but I do it. I'll tell you why I pronounce it like that later. But yes, Libkata.
Do you not want to say it now?
I mean, I can talk about it.
Go ahead.
I named her Libkata first. It's actually a pretty common thing in feminist biblical practice, since most biblical women are actually unnamed. It's a way to naming them is a way to sort of see them as a subject instead of an object that is just there for the male story progression, right? Like we just know her as Ezekiel's wife. So she is only known in regards to her relationship to Ezekiel. She is not a person in and of herself because of the naming practice. And so naming her makes her an individual with a subjectivity that we acknowledge. And so I take from a transliteration of from Genesis 23:2, where Abraham weeps for his wife Sarah, who is just passed, and it means to weep for her, which is something that Ezekiel is not allowed to do for his dead wife, right? But actually, I call it Libkata because, and this got cut out because word count. I wanted to say that her nickname, like Ezekiel would have called her Libby. Like that's his Libby, right? That's Libby. But I wanted to do that because I have two pretty significant Libbies that have been part of my life. My Hebrew language teacher was a woman named Libby Groves, or Elizabeth Groves, over at Westminster Theological Seminary. And then I was also deeply impacted by a woman I worked with at a church back in Grand Rapids named Libby. And it's interesting because both of those women I would deeply, deeply disagree with in a lot of ways now in my current life. But it was kind of my way subversively to see them as part of my journey in like a tender way, like they're still present in my life, especially Libby Groves, right? Like I know Hebrew because of her, and I love Hebrew because of her. So Libby, it was Libkata, it was Libby for me because of those women. So it was like my kind of way to acknowledge that. But Libby got cut out.
Subversive affection.
Yes, yes.
Nice. I like it. So Libby,
Yes, Libby.
Libby is dead, and
Libby gets killed. Yeah, Libby's murdered.
or well, and even if it is just the neutral, like Libby is dead, the
Right.
order coming down, don't mourn for Libby. That's pretty harsh.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and I know this is a prophetic communication, which is just
Mm-hmm.
that's a whole ball of wax in and of itself. If you
Sure
don't
it
want to
is.
go into that,
Ball of wax is a good way to put it. Yeah.
I mean, actually, I am curious, and you can say like, "Hey, that's too much." We could set that aside. Why the dramatics for the prophetic message? What's the point there?
Gosh, well, I think there are actually many scholars who are like basically stating, if it wasn't severe, would they have listened? Like if like some of the prophetics and the dramatics, I think of the prophetics, and it like it's very intentional in its extreme state. Not only do I believe like is it extreme because of the things that they are experiencing or the things that they could experience if we're going to do that, but uh, it's extreme because extreme actions and extreme behavior get people's attention. It really is that's what I would say at least, and I'm probably wrong. I'm sure there is somebody that's out there that's going, well, actually. And I welcome that take. I would love to find out where I'm wrong. I have
Yeah,
no problem being wrong.
but I
But
mean, if they're not willing to step up and say something, then
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
care.
Fight me.
You're here, so
Step up.
it's your
Fight
opinion.
me.
Yeah,
Yes, yes. I will say there are some people who are like, well, he can't mourn because he's a priest and he can't touch a dead body. Um, just that's not that feels so he would have to touch the dead body in order to mourn. I don't understand the logic of that, but there's a lot of like there's an actual, and I quote, he's not a misogynist, he's just a priest. And I'm like, there are a lot of priests who are misogynists, you know that, right? And also, like, are we equate like you can mourn and not touch a dead body.
yeah. You know what? Yeah, but so I came across a particularly
Yeah.
disgusting video on Instagram. Not disgusting like that it was, graphic or anything, but it was, I don't know the person's name, and I will say I'm going to pat myself on the back because I don't know what this man's name was, but
Oh,
he was
bless.
saying, today a 45-year-old man with a 16-year-old girl, that's
Oh,
trauma. Do you know what I'm talking about?
yeah, I do.
Okay, so I'm glad I don't know who it is. I wouldn't send people in this
A
person's
major
direction.
leader.
He's what?
A major leader.
Of awful people, I
Yeah,
suppose.
the current administration, yeah.
Okay.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah, I didn't know that. I was kind of kind of happy. Like I'm blissfully ignorant of who this person is, and I'm eager to move on. I don't even care.
Actually, if I'm not mistaken, RFK said 45 and plus year old men have they have good semen, they have good sperm, and 14 year olds are very surprisingly fertile. That was, and I quote.
So the the second part of this guy's thought was, but it wasn't trauma in the past. And because we're talking about it, I would not have brought this up. I would have dissociated from this thing to try and get on with the rest of my day
I
and
would
just
go into
think,
fight response.
yeah. But that is okay. And we kind of covered this the first conversation that we had, and I think it's come up since of like, hey, why are we slapping a modern or contemporary
Mm-hmm.
category on the ancient world? But okay, this guy actually gave me the best reason to think like, no, this is a legitimate framework for understanding what humanity is. And I would say if you look at the way that war was waged in the ancient world, like everything that we know about the way that war was waged, and then we look at how war affects people now, like people who are
Mm-hmm.
in the war zone,
Mm-hmm.
and like, oh, clearly there's trauma, that we should infer that everything we're seeing psychologically from people today was something that they were suffering then. And I would say normalization of terror
Yeah.
for girls and
Mm-hmm.
women and
Mm-hmm.
anyone who was on the lower end of the power structure in a
Mm-hmm.
society at all,
Mm-hmm.
we should also infer that that was trauma at that time too. And I know
Yep.
we're getting away from Ezekiel kind of directly at this moment, but I actually don't care because I needed to get this.
No,
I needed to get
no,
this out there.
nope. It's entirely fair. Now, I will say, we should look at how trauma expression varies from culture to culture. We need to be a lot less Western about that, right? But I, our nervous systems haven't changed. I mean, sure, like maybe yes, but ironically, if they have changed, it's because trauma is passed down and changes our genetic coding. like, uh, bodies are bodies, right? And so people respond, and it's bodies are bodies.
I want to talk about fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and flop because I
Let's
think
talk
most
about
people
it.
know of fight or flight. And then I learned about freeze at one point
Mm-hmm.
because that is typically in interpersonal conflict what I will do. But I'd kind of, can we walk through those things?
Yeah, we absolutely can. Okay, so now these labels are pretty clear in like what they actually do, but let's unpack a little bit. So when one perceives what the body perceives, and just as a side note, it can be inaccurate or accurate, but if the body perceives it, it perceives it as a stress or a threat. If the body perceives it to be a stress or a threat, they can move into two sides of something. They can move into it, and both sides require them moving out of their sort of window of tolerance or window of capacity into a state of dysregulation in variety of degrees. So hypoarousal is something that engages your parasympathetic nervous system. It slows down, it shuts down bodily processes, right? So those are your freeze and your flop. A lot of people argue that flop is just a more extreme form of freeze, just for reference. Um, so some of the examples I give in another chapter that I've done, imagine that. Um, when Saul hides in the baggage after having the spirit forcefully enter his body, um, he is going through somewhat of a freeze response, I believe. But Ezekiel asking the Lord to end his life is a bit more like a flop response. So if you can kind of like, there's a little bit of a differentiation there, right? Hyperarousal, however, engages your sympathetic, not the parasympathetic, your sympathetic nervous system, right? So it mobilizes your resources for action in fight and flight. So you're running away, you're punching the guy in the face, you're cutting off the ear of the guy who's trying to take away your Christ, right? These are some examples. Um, anyhow, um, this is to say that if your body was a car, hypoarousal is the brake pedal, and hyperarousal is the gas pedal. Now, fawn, the please and appease response. There's not a lot of data out on this. However, people have theorized that it's interestingly enough a hybrid response. It's both sides, your gas and your brake at the same time, because you turn off awareness of yourself. You're hypo aroused internally, but you are hyper aware of everything else. And my fun fact, what happens when you hit the gas and the brake at the same time in a car?
The break.
Bye bye, engine gone. But it's funny because I would say the fawn response is the most like morally championed response in society today. So a lot of people going through fawn and going, why am I so burnt out? Well, anyway, but moving through any of these stages, it's normal. These are adaptations, right? How somebody responds to a particular situation or stress or threat, it depends on that situation. It depends on an individual's psychic history and their formation and on the context of the event, right? And so dysregulation for is done in order to find safety, to survive. Um, it becomes what we call post-traumatic if they are deemed maladaptive, if they impede normal everyday life by clinicians. If those symptoms, if you stay kind of in a dysregulated period for longer than 1 month, but it has to be 6 months after the traumatic event for it to be deemed post traumatic or problematic, right? For it to be deemed a diagnosis. Because otherwise, right, if a traumatic event happens and you don't respond in a dysregulated state, actually people then go, what's wrong here? Like you should have, like that is the sign of somebody who's not well. If you're right, so even if you think about the window of tolerance, it shouldn't be so big that we tolerate everything. It shouldn't. There are things that are problematic that put us into dysregulated states. And weirdly enough, we should see them as adaptations that mobilize our bodies for particular responses. And so, yeah, parsing the slipperiness between adaptive and maladaptive is not so clean cut either. Which actually, that's a really good segue into conversation about dissociation as well.
Keep going. What do you?
Yeah, well, let's do this. It's interesting because so just to dissociation itself is a specific kind of mechanism that can occur with a trauma or a stressor or a threat, right? The term dissociation comes from the Latin root to sever or to separate. And Jamie Marich actually writes, quote, that this is the inherent human tendency to sever from the present moment when it becomes unpleasant or overwhelming, end quote. And so dissociation is like, I'm not here right now. It's based on what we just discussed. It's very much in line with the freeze response, right? I'm cutting it off. I'm turning off all indicators. Everything is down, brake pedal on. It shuts you down, providing an exit from the overwhelm that you're currently experiencing. However, one can also, interestingly enough, with conversation on complex trauma, one can also dissociate using fight any of the F's. So that's another interesting concept that I haven't quite understood very, very well, but alas. Again, dissociation is very normal. It can take a variety of forms, and it can go all the way into a form of dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder. And it's a very misunderstood thing and very like pathologized and in bad ways. So we shouldn't see dissociation necessarily as wholly bad, which is, again, good conversation. Because in some instances, there have been folks who have talked about how, like for people who live in a particular space, place, and time where their bodies are constantly being maligned, where they are under constant threat, where randomly maybe their wife just gets killed by their deity. I don't know. Um, um, some folks do dissociate actively in order to create a sense of safety in the midst of pain, in a world that does not accept them. One can argue that that kind of dissociation, even though likely clinicians might call it maladaptive, is very adaptive. It's One could argue then in this text that the dissociation that they are enforced to go through, even though because of that keyword enforced, I have problems. One could argue that that form of dissociation is how the exiles attempted to cope with their current situation and future traumatic situations. It allowed for a space where they could create this new special status that they do in the text. And dissociation itself for Ezekiel throughout the rest of the book of Ezekiel allows Ezekiel to kind of continue dreaming up imaginary worlds, where violence could not keep recurring for himself and his community. And so it can be a space where really beautiful things can occur, even with this maladaptive thing. I think it's important to recognize in some of those situations that the broken thing is not the person, it's the situation, it's the things that cause trauma that are broken, right? And making that key distinction.
But but when we're talking about, maladaptive, and it goes on for a long enough time that
Mm-hmm.
all of us on the outside of the person can look and see like this person is not well.
Yeah.
uh I can understand wanting to avoid the language of broken with regard to
Yeah.
people,
Yep.
but we are venturing into that territory, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because it's actually Margaret Odell who even states, um, because she reads what happens here like they are not to mourn. That is clear for Margaret, but she argues that what is happening is instead a marital ritual. So instead of doing the mourning processes, they are to put on their headwear or their turban and to put on their sandals. And she reads that as a marital ritual, in that they are going through a change of status. They are becoming, they're going through they're creating a new covenant. They're becoming the chosen bride of the deity instead of the people that they are now severing from, right? The people who are back in Jerusalem, they're no longer a part of this. They are not the chosen people. We are, right? And so we don't need to mourn. She actually writes, because it's a marital ritual, this is good news, right? She writes, quote, even if this seems like a denial of their grief, the exiles escape neither their pain nor their responsibility. That's all well and good. But then she writes, grief is not always a good teacher. Ezekiel 24 is attuned to this understanding of the seductiveness of mourning. And I'm like, okay, it would be one thing if if they were allowed to mourn at all, but they're not. It's not as if he's like, okay, you guys have been doing this for a while. Can you not? No more. Your wife just died, and your family members and the temple is all going to get destroyed. Don't cry at all. Don't worry. I got this. We're going to get married. It's a little spiritual bypassy.
Yeah, that didn't, I don't know, it didn't seem to mesh with that. Like a more positive reading didn't really seem to mesh with when I actually read the passage.
Mm-mm.
And that's where one of the things I knew I threw in there was the phrase "pine away in your iniquities," and that's from the
Yeah.
NRSV UE that I was
Yep.
reading. But I
Yep.
was like, well, it sounds like they're not mourning to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
and they're in a situation where Adonai thinks they should be, and so this, uh, you know, like, I'm going to kill this person, but you don't mourn to reflect back to them what they look like not mourning, and they're just going to continue to pine away in their iniquities. I
Yeah.
don't
They're going to be consumed by their iniquities.
yeah, I don't read that as a particularly positive thing.
No. No. And there are some people who read that and they're like, well, see, he lets them groan to one another, right? They that's part of the other half of that verse, right? You will be consumed by your sins. Pine away is another way of translating that, and you can, but you can groan to one another. And so some people have read that and they've been like, oh, well, they can talk to each other then. Like, it's fine. I'm like, well, there's a differentiation between grief and groaning and engaging in the public ritual and relational practices that would help them come to terms with acceptance and healing. Instead, they are cemented in, and actually, it's interesting that you brought up earlier. They're cemented in this ritual of, they are ritualizing the severing of themselves from their family members, from what was, instead of actually mourning and grieving. Like, let's just move right to the thing, right? Let's just move right into action. We don't need to think about it. We don't need to feel. I mean, you can kind of feel on the side, but we're not going to do this. We need to just get married.
So bear with me because I'm not really
Mm-hmm.
sure what the connective tissue is here, but I read Homosociality and Male Friendship by Barbara Tita.
Mm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the explanation there seems to be like, well, Adonai is a character who is interested in his own honor throughout
Yeah.
Hebrew Bible, and
Uh-huh.
that's kind of the point, and that's the point of the story. And
Yep.
I got a visceral sense of there's a similar situation happening here.
Very much so. I mean, the entire book is about, and actually, if you think about it, right, one of the things that I argue is that Ezekiel could be, in essence, dealing with some dissociative identity disorder, and that there's kind of a slippage between the deity and the prophet. They kind of are hard to differentiate at times, right? And part of that is because he is supposed to emulate and also mediate in a lot of ways. Um, but it's fascinating because there are really good discussions on how, if that is the case, we also need to do a trauma informed reading of the deity. He's very much experiencing shame. Actually, I think this was another one of your questions, where you asked, about dissociation being brought on by societal pressure or cultural convention. There's actually something called disenfranchised grief. It's coined by Dr. Kenneth Doka, and it's a way to describe how there are losses that deserve grief, but that loss does not fit within social or clinical expectations. And when grief is not seen as legitimate or accepted, it is not only invalidated and insignificant, but arguably, when a society disenfranchises the legitimacy of grief, the resulting function inhibits the expression of grief is shame. It's shame. And so a lot of the sort of honor shame aspects, and interestingly, there's a ton of really fantastic work on the concept of shame and Ezekiel. It's all over. Um, and I don't even touch on that in my article, right? But there's a lot to say about what is the grief that we allow as a society to fit within the story of what we are supposed to be, and what do we not allow in our stories, and how what that creates is shame if we don't allow things to be felt.
I'm thinking about your comments from the last episode about from the last conversation we had around shame that that it's not a particularly helpful thing. Um, yeah,
No,
I would
no, it
encourage
isn't.
listeners to go back and or the audience to go back and check that out. Because it is later for you than it is for me, and I don't want to eat up too much of your time.
I appreciate it.
What what has not come up from the article that you were hoping I would ask about?
Hmm. I'm like looking through all of the questions I looked at. I feel like we weirdly inadvertently covered most of it.
Completely by accident.
Completely by accident. We just kind of bounced around. Um, well, I will say, one of your questions involves, like, what would I recommend for further
Oh,
reading?
yeah, no, that comes next. I just like to make
Okay,
sure.
okay. I don't. Um, one of the questions you have right before that last question is, has Israel dissociated, or is that something Adonai is saying that they will do? Um, to which I would say Ezekiel has dissociated for sure. I would argue that, by the end of the book, he is fully in vision world and he is not in reality. Okay. He's up wherever he's at. He's in a vision. And that for him is likely kind of a comfort, right? That is where no more pain, no more violence, nothing bad can happen. And as I've discussed briefly, and Carly Crouch actually does this really well in her article on Ezekiel and the construction of cultural trauma, the severing between those who are back in the land from the exiles who are now the true Israel, and sort of that being what the book of Ezekiel is really trying to get at, right? Although we don't really necessarily see Israel dissociate, well, the Judahite exiles dissociate per se. I would say that construction, that cultural, communal construction of this is what happened to us and this is what we are doing about it, or this is what we say about the trauma that we've gone through. The legacy that Ezekiel creates, it does endure, and we do see it in other biblical texts, right? Where the the exiles are the true Israel, right? Right. Funny Freudian slip, kind of. But ancient Israel and ancient Jews are not a monolith, right? And so even though the book of Ezekiel is going to argue those things, and other biblical books might agree with that, the corpus consistently contains inconsistencies. That's one thing you can count on for the corpus, is that it's going to fight with itself. And that is one of the reasons why I love it so much. It has no problem maintaining multiple voices and perspectives. And so has Israel dissociated, or is that something that the Lord will say they will do? I think that was Ezekiel's hope and other power players' hope. But it is not the end of the story. Well, it's the end of Ezekiel's story.
Yeah. So what would you recommend on trauma, on Ezekiel? What would you recommend that they read, watch, listen to? That kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Well, there's not a ton. I think you even say this at the beginning. There's not a lot out there on the concept of its dissociation and biblical text. There's just not. At least not that I'm aware of either. But on dissociation, more generally speaking, I cite Jamie Marich's book, Dissociation Made Simple, and it's quite lovely and it's very easy to read. But one of the concepts that I don't touch on in this article that I think is really important for anyone to know about is Richard Schwartz's work. Richard Schwartz. He does a lot of work on the concept of structural dissociation, which is something that some therapists will utilize when they talk about, in therapy, internal family systems. And he has a book called No Bad Parts that I would just deeply, deeply recommend for really anyone. It is such a good, and I don't like to throw out the word healing often, but it's a healing read for anyone. So I would very much recommend Richard Schwartz on IFS, which is No Bad Parts. And he just came out with a little children's book on it too. It's very cute. It's very lovely. Anyways, otherwise, a lot of the stuff on dissociation gets just very clinical. And of course it does. Like, this is a clinical thing. So those two books I would definitely recommend. I would also recommend Nancy Bowen's entire stinking commentary. She does it through a trauma-informed lens, and it's fantastic. And of course, I'm going to mention Sarah Emanuel's book, Trauma Theory, Trauma Story, because
of course.
Because
we love Sarah Emanuel here.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We're fans.
What do you read for fun?
Currently I'm on a fantasy sci-fi kick. Yeah, I'm finishing up the series, gosh, what is it called? The Southern Reach series by Jeff Vandermeer. So I'm finishing up, I think it's called, no, I just finished Acceptance. So I'm on the fourth book in the series. It's technically horror sci-fi, but it's so good. The first one's called Annihilation, and they made a movie out of it. I didn't watch the movie because I can't do the visual parts, otherwise it'll freak me out. But I also just finished up The Poppy Wars by R.F. Kuang, and that was horrible. And she has done horrible things to my psyche, and I adore her in every single way possible. I cannot recommend that series enough. But I will be starting a new series after this. What is it called? Anyway, I'm dabbling in that right now. That is a little bit of my escape, but it's deeply problematic, right? Like I read the Poppy Wars, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I need to do a reading of the Poppy Wars alongside the Book of Esther, because here it is.
Yeah.
And yeah. Anyway,
Have you read any Naomi Novik?
I have not.
So I think you would like the Scholomance series.
Oh, I've heard of it.
I mean, she's going to do bad stuff to your psyche as well.
Yeah,
it is. I cried at the end of all three books. Cried.
Damn it.
Like, beautiful. And you're rooting for this girl, and it's just like she's gonna do well against all odds. And it was really good. I loved Babel. Dabble.
Oh.
I know. Look, I mean, you've already brought up R.F. Kuang. I really enjoyed Babel.
Oh, that book was fantastic. That is in my top 5. Not gonna lie, but she just came out with Catabasis, and
somebody at work asked me, "How do you say that new book?" And I was like, "I don't. I don't."
She doesn't care. I don't care. Even when you're like, "How do you say Libkata?" I don't care. Libkata. Say it. Granted, I will say there is something to be said about saying, people's names and words properly. But in this instance, I feel like a lot of it is weaponized to be like, I'm smarter than you. It's Catabasis. Anyway, I'm better than you. And I don't like doing that. So I finished Catabasis in like a few days, and like also just, I cannot tell you enough how she perfectly encapsulates the academic experience, ironically through a trip to hell.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Severance.
Yeah. Well, duh.
And Severance. So you want?
Yeah, that will mess with your life. Yeah.
Okay. Well, unless you have anything else for us, I'm going to call this one good.
I don't.
Alexiana Fry, thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Take care. Okay. That's the end of this episode. Next week on the podcast, Kirk McGregor and I will be discussing another Journal of Biblical Literature article. This one titled "The Pro-Choice Biblical Ethic of American Evangelical Scholars Before the Religious Right." Something of an inflammatory title. I've addressed that in the 2026 preview episode. I get it. That may not sound palatable. It may sound like I'm trying to be combative, or that he's trying to be combative. I don't think that's the case at all. I think he is evaluating the historical circumstances of something that actually happened and kind of charting the course, or rather not charting the course, but rather following the trail of how things changed, because the difference between 1968 and now is that, to say conservative evangelical scholars and pro-choice biblical ethic, that, those terms don't go together anymore. So a discussion of how that came to be, what the differences are, is definitely warranted. And I appreciate Kirk McGregor sitting down with me to have that conversation. Again, I know I did it up on the front end, but I'll do it on the back end here as well. If you want to hear this now, if you're listening for free, you can hear this now for $5 a month. So if this preview sounds interesting to you, you want to hear the full conversation and not wait another week, there is a way to do that. So, yeah, I don't think I have anything else except to say, if you get a chance to love someone, please take it. Take care.
And so there became this alliance between several evangelicals and the Republican Party, and that became the religious right. And after that point, when evangelicals would try to argue for a pro-choice ethic of any form, they were pretty roundly either denounced or ignored. A great example of that is a book. It's by D. Gareth Jones. It's called Brave New People, Ethical Issues at the Commencement of Life. And so this was a book published by an Australian evangelical, and he advocated for this pro-choice ethic, and he sort of wrote oblivious to what was going on the American political scene, kind of like that nothing had changed. And so this book was originally published by University Press, and University Press got so much hate mail and backlash from people that they actually let the book go out of print, that they declined to keep publishing it. And at that point, Jones submitted a revised version to Eerdmans, and Eerdmans is the one who publishes the revised version. And in the preface to the revised version, Jones says, how in the world did the idea of being pro-life get added to the list of essential evangelical theological beliefs? How did that happen? And he was like shocked by this. So that would be an illustration of sort of the sea change that took place really quite rapidly between, say, 1977, 78, 79, and then moving further.